In this video, we're going to take a look at recreating Mario Tran Phuc's GYUKI 88 effect, where the particles are creating these twisting trails. Let's have a look at how it runs. So that's a cool effect, and we've also done a couple more examples. Let's have a look at these ones. Okay, so let's jump in and get started. Now, the basic of this effect is actually using animated geometry to control the particles to get the twist. So rather than using keyframes, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a simple rig so that this can be more art directable. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a plane object and we'll set the width and height segments down to 1. So we don't need all that geometry in there, and we want to keep it running as fast as possible. And simply scale it down a little bit. The size has no relevance because we're just going to attach a particle onto the surface. So we're going to drop this guy inside a couple of null objects. So we need 2 nulls in the hierarchy, and we'll put one there and then the plane in there. Now the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to put our expression on this one, and then we're going to use the top one so that we can rotate the axes when it's inside the particle system. This is going to make it so that they're facing outwards. We don't need to name them, you can just keep them as nulls or name them as if you need to. Now we're going to select the plane, we're going to right click, we're going to choose Expresso. So we get the Expresso window up. And before we start creating the expressions, we're going to select the top one, go to User Data, Manage User Data, and we'll add a group. Just pull that out of the hierarchy there, and call this one Rotations. Then add data to that, and with the data we're going to set that to call speed. We're going to change it to a float slider and our units to real, and we don't need a maximum of 1,000, that's just too many. You could go as low as 20, but we'll keep it at 100 just so you got a good range of control. So we can say OK to that, and that just means we've got some user data on our top null for how fast this thing's going to run. So let's drop our plane object into the Expresso editor, and we're going to get a Expresso calculate math and Expresso general time. So what we're doing is we're going to use time through the math node to control the plane's rotation on the heading. And we need to set the math node to be multiply, and by default it's not going to do anything because it's set to 0, but if you increase this you can see it starts to speed it up. Now that's a bit too extreme, let's say something like 5. So you've got control over how fast this guy spins, and to hook that up to our slider we need to drop our null back in there. In the null we'll go and find our rotations slot and get the speed channel. Select the math node and drag the little calculator icon into your Expresso window, and we're going to connect the speed to the input parameter input 2. So we can close that, and now you can see that it's driven by Expresso, so it's back to speed 0, and then we can control the speed to whatever we need it to be. So that just gives you a little bit more control down the pipeline when you might need to change how much you get from your spirals, or if you want to make them slower or faster. Okay, so that's the main rig done. Let's get our Expresso up, our X particles. We'll get a system and we'll get an emitter. Let's call this one emitter A, just so we can see what we're doing with our emitters. and a generator object. So choose generator, drop our null into the generator object because we're going to be emitting those planes as particles. But to start with, we're going to go into the emissions, change it to shot, and just emit one particle. That just gives us a bit of time to play around. So we've got one particle with a frame speed of 150. Just play and make sure your generator is talking to the emitter. So you can see that it's emitting the particle, but it's on the wrong axes. We need to change our extended data to tangential to use rotation, but that still won't change how this plane's working. So we need to go to our top null, go to axis mode, and make sure you rotate it so that the z-axis is pointing up, so just 90 degrees. Now we can push play, and you can see the plane happily spinning along on the right axis. Looks like back face coloring's on, so I'm just going to fix that. I want to see the back faces of our particle. So we've got that working, that's good. Next I'm going to get the generator and I'm going to put that inside a connect object. So connect object, just drop that in and make sure that's a parent, and that means we can emit particles onto that surface. So let's turn off weld, we don't need weld on there. I'm going to go to our emitters, create a new emitter. This one is going to be emitter B. And emitter B is going to emit from the object, which is our connect. Drop that in there. And rather than polycenter, we're going to use polygon area. Now we need to go to our emissions, and one thing to note with this kind of setup is if we're going to emit on this surface, this surface and the particle is generated on frame 1 or frame 0. So if we try to emit on something, it's not there, so we need to go up a frame. So we're going to go and change our emit on all frames and go up 1, just so that it's going to emit on the second frame rather than the first frame. And let's just for now turn it to shot, and we'll do 2 particles, see if that attaches anything. We don't need any speed. I'm going to go back to the objects tab and use stick to source object. Let's go to our display and set that to something that's visible. Let's get some color in there and just change the scale so that we can see if our particles are working properly. So go back to frame 0, push play, and no particles on there yet, so we need to just keep tweaking until we can get a particle. So go up 1 more frame, add a couple more. Okay, so we've got 4 particles on there, we don't want that. Let's go back to 1. Okay, so we've got our 1 particle on there, it's on the surface and it's getting the spin. Now we can go into the generators, choose generator, trails, and set trails to emitter B. So let's push play. So you can see we're now getting the nice spirals. It's not that nicely sitting on the surface, so I might just change the seed a little bit. See if we can get it a bit further out. That's better. So you get your nice spiral happening. Okay, so that's good. That's very much the basic of the setup. Now what you can do as well is have a trail object for this spline, which will give you an inner spline along this. So let's go and do that. Let's call this one trail B, and we can just drag and drop that, holding down control. Call this one trail A, and set trail A to talk to emitter A, like so. Push play, and now you're going to get the inside trail as well. So we can hide the connect object completely. We don't need to see that. Okay, that's cool. And now you can start thinking about things like how many particles you want, and do you want them to come from a surface or from a shape. So what I'm going to do is get emitter A, change my rectangle to a sphere, and we're going to emit, let's say, 8 of these guys. Okay, so now you can see we've only got one spiral happening, and that's because emitter B is only emitting one particle. So let's set that to 8, and we can leave everything else as it is. Play, and now you're getting lots of spirals happening, a couple missing there, so just up the count until you get exactly what you need. Let's see how that looks. Still a couple missing. You can tweak these to get exactly what you want. That's looking like it's getting all of them. Okay, so now we can start introducing some other effects such as turbulence. So let's go to our modifiers, motion modifiers, choose turbulence, and just to start to get some nice motion going on inside of there. So you can see them starting to curl around, and you can increase this or decrease it. Okay, so that's looking pretty cool, and the next thing we need to do is actually get some geometry in there. And the easiest thing to do is go to generators, choose spline mesher, and first thing to do is turn off joins because we don't have any joins, and then just drop your trails into there. And you can turn those inner ones on and off if you, depending on what you want them to do. So let's have a look. I'm going to create a bit more in size, and add in some subdivisions. Let's stick with one for now to keep the speed up. That's cool. Let's get some more particles in here in the first one. Let's go to our emissions. Let's set that to about 15. And this one to 20. So you're getting some nice variation in the sizes as well. That one's pretty cool, tight. Let's change our turbulence up a little bit. Okay, so that's almost there. We want to look at getting some rendering in there, and we'll look at say a shot like this one with the little glowy bits on the top and the shiny. So let's look at recreating that. I'm going to go to the spline mesher and add a Phong tag just to smooth it out, get rid of any of the Phong shading errors, and we want some particles in there. So we're going to set the emitter B particles again to tangential so that the particles are going to get the right orientation, and we'll just send a nice cube in there, scale that down, go to generators, create a generator object, drop the cube in there, and the generator is going to generate from emitter B, so it puts a particle on the top. And you can see they're getting the correct orientation. You could also put one again for the emitter going out, but we'll leave that. In fact, I'm going to turn that one off. Just keep with the spirals. And I'm also going to put a light source in there, so I'm going to get another generator. That's going to talk to emitter B. Get a light, drop that inside that generator object, and with the light we're going to go in to general, change the color, get that nice orange, go to details and change the fall off to inverse square, and then just scale that down. So have a quick render just to see if it's getting the fall off where you want it to be, or if it's still too strong. Okay, that's good. Then we get another light, keep this one out of the system. This is going to be our blue light. Again, it's going to have an inverse square fall off. General, get the color in there. Like so. Just tweak that to suit how you want the shot to look, and put some shadows in there. Area's a good shadow just because it's nice and clean. It's a bit slower to render, but it's the nicest looking shadow. Okay, so let's get some textures on there as well. So I'm going to create a new material, and I'm going to set this one to the nice orange color again. Go to the Basics tab, turn off Reflectance, turn on Luminance, and then copy your orange into the Luminance. And let's just drop that down a little bit. So that's going to be our cubes that we generated. And then we'll create another material, make this one a dark, sort of reflective shader. So just add in a GGX, turn up your roughness, and drop in a Fresnel layer mask. You can turn down the specular as well. Okay, so that's going to go directly onto this blind mesher. And now we need to get some reflective environment in there. So we're going to get a new material, turn off reflection, go to color, drop in a color. So I'm just going to go to my HDR eyes and just use any HDR you can find that works for the scene, and drop that onto a sky. Then if you don't want that to be renderable, just go into your Cinema 4D tags, Compositing, and turn off Scene by Camera and Casting and Receiving Shadows. Okay, so let's have a quick render. It's looking like we want. We'll change the reflection, the render method to physical, so that we can get some depth of field in there. So I'm going to go in and grab a camera, and make sure that you have a object or area to focus on. I'm going to use the XP system because it's right in the center of the effect, and we can just sort of frame ourselves up nicely because we want to get that depth of field happening. So go to render settings, change your mode to physical, enable depth of field, and I'm going to set this to automatic, keep it at 20, which is pretty low. You want to go down to about 5% for the final render, and close that and go to my camera, go to physical, change the f-stops. Let's try 0.2, see how that looks. And let's get a diaphragm shape. 6 blades is good. You can see it's going to render a bit quicker as well than the standard renderer. Starting to get the depth of field showing up here on the main branches, and if you want that to be stronger, just go lower in your f-stops, depending on the size of your scene as well. We can make it a bit more extreme. Let's go 0.05. Let's just do a render region, help speed it up. That's good. Nice and defocused up close to the camera, and all sharp and contrasty inside the center of the origin. So that's how you set up the effect, and to keep it speeding, I'm just going to close off all those generators. Turn off that light. now that we've got it like it's working, you can go back and look at your connect object and the speed, and that's going to play a big role in how sort of tight these twisties are. If you want it faster, say something like 22, you'll get really super tight ones. Or you can go slower and get really lazy arcs going across the screen. So that having that level of control just gives you more control when it comes to talking to your directors and your art directors, and they might want to tweak it, and you don't want to have keyframes to start tweaking. It's easier just to have the slider. So that's it. That's the basic look. Let's look at the final renders again.